Okay, we are live. Take it away.
Well, greetings, everyone. My name is Luke Edmonson.
Well, I'm David Edmonson. I'm your father.
No! All my life, I've had people claiming to be my dad. It's very confusing. So we're photographers here in Dallas, Texas. It's a privilege to be with you. Thank you to Godox for inviting us to be a part of this talk and representing them. And of course, thank you to Adorama for giving us the platform to be with you today. I know that there's been a tremendous amount of work that's gone into bringing this to you. So thank you to all the fine folks working behind the scenes to make that possible. And of course, thank you for the fact that, they wanted to celebrate World Photography Day.
Absolutely. Belated.
A belated one at this point. That's right. And, if you haven't ever seen us before, if you have no clue who we are, we love the history of photography. So I think the idea of World Photography Day kind of resonates with us in a deep and passionate way. We're certainly going to be talking about some photographers that we admired going back even to the 1800s. There are a few questions that have come in, and so why don't we start by answering these questions, and then we can answer the question of who we are, why should you listen to us, and then we can do the talk. Does that sound good?
Absolutely.
Okay. So the first question we have is from Pooja, who wants to know how we compete with AI. And my short answer would be, I don't think you do. I mean, I think it's a different thing. If you're asking if you can produce work that is distinct or different than AI, well, of course you can, because you're a creative being. You may just have to work at it. Is there ways that you can leverage AI or technology in order to accomplish things? Absolutely. And would we use AI for commercial work or something like that, where we needed to be able to quickly and easily put so many different contexts or pick something? Of course, it's a tool. What I try and teach my kids, and I think you instilled in me, is the proper tool, properly used, makes quick work. And so that's kind of how we think about it and approach it, similar to, what kind of light should you use or what kind of camera should you use?
And I heard today they were coming up with some laws in the U.S. that are trying to decide whether you have copyright with AI. And so all these things are actually happening. Photo competitions, I think they're coming up with rules for AI in different categories, or whether it's allowed to be used at all. And I think that's really important. I think it's a tool that could be used.
Yeah. I will say this, all the images that you're going to see in our presentation were created before AI, so you don't have to worry about anything being something that was just from our imagination.
Well, and beyond that, we like to do everything single capture.
Well, yes, now you're starting to give them an idea of who we are. I like that. We do like to work single capture, which simply means, when David started out and growing up, a lot of it was building sets and learning how to, as he said, get something in a single click. And so the preponderance of the work that we'll show you is all stuff that we've done, along that fashion. Not to say that Photoshop is bad. I mean, that was our question before. First it was, should you use digital instead of film? One time it was, well, can we use 35 instead of 8x10? All these things have come along, and and it happens faster and faster. And there's people that get out of the industry just because they say, well, I'm going to make myself a little bit of a nerd here. There was a big controversy in the days of wet plate and dry plate, and the people that basically did wet plate said, well, now that dry plate's come along, anybody's a photographer now. You don't have to know any of the different chemistry behind it, yada, yada, yada. It takes half the time, There's all these new things you can do. And so the conversation's kind of been an ongoing one for a long, long period of time. A question we have here from Susan is, what are some tips on perspectives? Have one? And lighting when combining objects. So I need to better understand what she's saying there, suss it out. Let's try and think about some different ways to do it. If you're talking about things to watch out for when you're arranging objects, I'd say from the perspective of the camera in relation to your objects, it would be visual tangencies. So that may be one way of interpreting it, whether that's an abutment, two things kissing, or how they overlap, or what's coming out of them, and so forth.
I look for tangencies. If I'm photographing the entire person, I usually like to lower my camera to where it's about chest high,
Mhm.
and then I look at the back of the head to make sure it's not a tangency with the background.
Let's just take it a little different way here, and let's just take out the perspective part. And when it says, what are some tips on lighting or combining objects? And so let's say at first that you're going to shoot two different things at a time and you're going to assemble them together. Okay. So number one, you would want, because we just did this past weekend, you want your camera perspective to be relatively the same height, because you're not trying to take something that's shot up here and shot down here and then try and Photoshop those together. But then the other thing is that you want the lighting to feel very consistent from shot A to shot B whenever you're doing a combination. That might be something to
I think as a general rule, just for Unity, you want a slight even overlap most of the time.
You're talking about how the objects actually arrange? Absolutely. Yeah. So sometimes, like in fashion, and part of it has to do with the genre. In fashion, the clothing's more important than the people. The people become secondary. So most of the time, the people, they may connect, but they stand distinct from each other. Whereas if you were to do it in wedding photography or whatever, oftentimes you're overlapping because the clothing, although important, becomes secondary to the people.
They're trying to produce a dominant mass.
Exactly right. So Susan, here's what I encourage you to do. Type in some more so that we can get some more information about what specifically you're asking, and we'll be happy to do that for you. Question from Rico says, I recently purchased a Godox Fresnel lens and barn doors. I love the hard light effects it produces. I don't see a lot of videos on that particular modifier. Could you go over the finer points of this amazing light modifier? Thank you. Yeah. So turn it a little this way, turn it a little, what you're controlling is the softness of that light as it's striking something.
And the size.
And the size. And your barn doors are also controlling if you don't want it to spill on other things. So what are the finer points? I think as we go through our talk here, you're going to see examples where we've used barn doors or Fresnel type lenses in order to accomplish different things, to create visual shapes with our lighting, especially if you're using them as an architectural feature, which is one of the benefits. But also if you're just lighting an individual.
It's one of my favorite things because I believe in using pools of light when you're trying to make a larger image where you're actually trying to get different focal points throughout the image.
Yep. So
instead of just one big main light, lots of pools.
So my short answer for you on it would be go pick up some books on theatrical lighting, because you're going to see Fresnels being used all the time. What David said is exactly right. You're creating a pool of light. You're determining what it's hitting, what it's not hitting, how hard the quality of light is that is striking your subject, for what intended purpose. And ultimately, just remember that a modifier is a modifier. It is a tool you're using in order to illustrate or support whatever is your motivation for that light. So you need to properly know your motivation for using that particular light source, whether it's hard or soft, warm or cold, etc., as we'll go through. And then that will inform the decisions that you make.
And the distance will also create the harshness.
Absolutely. Sure. So you can use different things when you twist it and turn it, but also just sometimes even your physical distance is gonna create it as well. Okay. Question from our dear friend in Japan. How are you, sir? What is the source of your ideas? Well, I would say the wrinkly gray matter. Where we get our inspiration from is all over.
It's something usually I've listened to, something I've read, something that I think is an important story to tell, and then I try to figure out how to visualize it.
Yeah, usually it has to do with something that is not necessarily the beginning of the discussion. It's usually the main point or the end result. Let's say it was a myth, a parable. It was some form of a fable, like it has some sort of message to it that you want to communicate. And then you back your way into how can I best illustrate it. This short of it would be that at the end of the day, the byproduct of a good idea is happiness. And so everything begins with a thought, and that's where we begin is we had a thought, I thought about doing this, I thought about doing that. And then you don't move forward until you're happy with where the idea is gone. And the other thing I've learned is you have to be at a place where you could ultimately verbally communicate it or writtenly communicate it to somebody else in a way that they understand it and could implement it.
And don't connect all the dots.
Well, that becomes.
Let them connect some too.
Yep.
They have to have involvement.
So you want to take it all the way down. So now you have a thought, it becomes an idea, you want to illustrate it. The trick becomes to always leave just a little ambiguity, but you have to have a logical takeoff point and landing point so that people don't feel like it's a frustrating puzzle, like they just can't figure it out. They want to come up with their own interpretation or meaning, even if it's not your original intent. But if you just are so obvious with the answer, then it's like you're just hitting people over the head, and then it's no fun, right? It's just the answer is right before you. So we'll look at some examples inside of our work here as well. And then it kind of follows up with Will's question here. How much of your lighting plan is developed at the planning concept design stage for each campaign, and our lights and light availability, I guess? And they said they have 2 lights, while the shop might need 4 or 5 for the proper execution. So what you're getting to is 2 topics, one of which we're going to hit, one of which we wouldn't hit. The first topic would become conception or preconceiving your ideas.
And in this talk, we light everything on concept.
Well, generally speaking, yeah.
We know where every light's going before we ever put a light on the set.
Sure, you're talking about the picture we're looking at right now.
Or many of them.
Yeah. And that's true. Oftentimes, we've already worked out ahead of time, sketching it out and problem solving based off of the equipment we have for whatever reason we're going to use, whether it's a self-imposed restriction, it's a external restriction, like you can't plug in somewhere, you've got to be battery powered, or a wedding day, I need to be light and battery powered. But also, there are times, and you're going to see in here as well, we'll have stuff where we didn't think how we were going to light it beforehand, but we knew from experience how to solve the problem, even to the point of just grabbing a plastic bag and putting it over the light, and that became our softbox. So there's a bit of MacGyver, and which is just like problem solving, and then there's a bit of forethought that can be beneficial as well. And ultimately, the answer to your question about you have 2 lights and the shot may need 4 or 5, you've answered the question. What you're looking for is sufficiency. What is the sufficient number of lights, regardless of the number that you're using, whether that is a single light or that's 15 lights, as we'll look at.
Sometimes you can just add a mirror.
Well, yeah, sometimes, yeah, exactly. All of a sudden you realize you didn't even need an extra light there. You thought you did, but back in, let's say, the 70s and 80s, used to be a very popular thing where you put one light, reverse key light, behind your subject as the hair light, and it would give you your intensity, and it already needed to be brighter, and then it would go past the subject as it hit them for separation, and then they would use mirrors then to reflect that light back in as the main light, and so you have this 3-dimensional lighting effect that's being created, but it's all being done
all with one light source.
Yep. That was Dean Collins, who was the one that kind of popularized that look. So great. If you haven't ever seen his work, go out there and check it out, and also some of his education. So with that said, let's just kind of start with why we're here. My background is I'm 3rd-generation photographer. You're what?
2nd.
Oh my goodness, how did that work? And you grew up with a father who did photography, photographic sales, etc. You cut your teeth in the film days.
I did. I wanted to be a fine art painter, and I ended up having to take a photography class in college in order to learn how to shoot reference art. And like so many other people, the first day of class, I said, this is it.
Growing up or starting your career, which I don't think it's wrong to say you started in 74. Your primary background was commercial photography, magazines, books, CD covers, annual reports. How many different magazines did you shoot for concurrently?
I had 58 magazines that I shot for every month concurrently.
And then when it came to just traveling, like what would an idea of your travel schedule be?
Once the kids were in college, I was in 200 cities a year.
So certainly prolific. And part of it, when you travel or when you're shooting, you're doing volume like that, there's got to be a lot of problem solving that's going along, using your equipment, knowing your equipment, practicing, and things like that. In 2001 is when I came to my dad and I said, we're not really shooting together like I had hoped for. He said, I don't really know how to do that in the commercial world. You hire a photographer and an assistant, but not really two photographers. And so I said, what about weddings?
Mm-hmm.
And what'd you say?
I went, gag me with a spoon, son.
Because wedding photography was at that time considered, well, you had like church directories and school photos and then wedding photography. But it wasn't the popularized art form, we'll call it today, that is now. We've shot 1,000 weddings since. And then, portraits for people along that way. And then people also know us for our fine art photography. We have received accolades, of course, but they're not really important. They just come as a byproduct of the work you do. And probably the thing that I'd encourage you the most in is when I watch an NBA basketball player play, when I go to a game, I notice that they warm up and they practice their shots before the game even starts. And, the height of that basket never changes, and yet for some reason they're practicing. And then after halftime, they even come out and do it again, and they just got finished playing a half, and yet they're still out there practicing. And there's a popular concept that you hear amongst photographers, which is what?
Not unless I get paid. Am I picking up my camera?
Exactly. I don't pick up my camera unless I get paid. And you go, well, that's great, but you should be, right? You should be testing yourself. And I think Rembrandt's going to have something to say about that here in a second. So let's begin. So as we're looking at creative storytelling, it begins with the proper tools. Now, we are not here to show you everything that Godox offers in its product line, but we are going to show you a significant number of the different tools that they have and give you an idea of some applications that you can use them for, and perhaps inspire you or give you something to aspire towards as you're doing your photography. And it might even help reinforce or secure what you're thinking about, what the next slide is that you're going to add to your arsenal, what the direction of that might be. When we think about lighting, we mentioned before theatrical terms, light controls our color, it controls our contrast, it's about the quality, it's about light direction, it creates an overall atmosphere, it's a combination of our ambient, our scenic, our sculptural lights. It reveals form, it hides things, it gives us our center of emphasis, our point of focus, tells us what's a hierarchy of what we're looking at. So in so many different ways, light is essential to photography. That's why the word photography even comes from the idea of drawing with light. But oftentimes I hear photographers get more excited about their lighting than they do about the content of their picture. And what I'd say to you is, if you're more technically minded and you just say, oh my gosh, look at this lighting, you go, yeah, that's great, but perhaps the composition's not there or the subject matter's not there, the picture oftentimes falls apart or is incomplete, or you don't get that response you're so desiring from the people looking at it that are supposed to be so amazed at your lighting skills. So for us, we enjoy our lighting. It is secondary in importance to what it is. And what you're going to see, especially in a picture like this, is that the lighting itself, we work it until such a point that it's receded somewhat into the background so as to not draw undue influence to itself. So we want it to draw your attention, but we don't want it to draw undue influence. There's a guy named Henry Peach Robinson, and he basically said this, that there's a great difference between regarding a product of the camera as an end in itself and treating the camera as an instrument by means of which the laws may be used and played off one another in accordance with artistic ideals. And this is the key, so as to be the servants rather than the masters of the photographer. So your tools, your camera, your lights, all of it are secondary to what you're bringing, which is the ideas. Okay? If you needed a place to be able to to start, I'd highly encourage you in the idea of World Photography Day go pick up, you can get it in a PDF. It's Pictorial Effect in Photography. It's Henry Peach Robinson, 1800s. Again, these people were closest in connection to the advent of photography. So they still came out of a high degree of drawing and marksmanship. There's a book called the Sketcher's Manual you can get, but they really understood the art principles, which were kind of lost in the 1900s, and hopefully we're starting to go back to better understand. But I love this idea here. It says art is not a divine gift, so it's not like it's just like there's only natural artists that are divinely struck, but it's not a mechanical trade either. It's got solid scientific foundations, but practice is important. But none of that works, just practice alone, unless that's the direction of principle. So my analogy back to basketball is this. People say, well, practice makes perfect. No, perfect practice makes perfect. You can shoot a basketball 1,000 times until you start making it in. It doesn't matter, right? You've just learned 1,000 ways not to make a basket. So just beginning with this particular picture here, this is one that we had done for Godox for using their V1, which is just a on-camera flash. Can also be used off-camera. Has TTL and manual. Also has some modifiers that you can be able to put on there. So whether that's we want to change the color, or we wanted to use snoots or barn doors, should be similar to the Fresnel. Excuse me. All sorts of different things that you can do, flags, however it is that you're wanting to shape light. And so rather than us just talking about it, let's listen for a second to kind of the end of the video that breaks down exactly how this shot was created.
Now let's stop and take a minute and look at where we placed our lights, what were their settings, and what modifiers did we use. After scouting the location, we sketched out the initial design. We purposely built compositional triangles using leading lines, styling, and gesture. And then we thought it'd be fun to repeat the alternating light and dark areas both horizontally and vertically. And all of this is done for the sole purpose of rewarding you for looking as your eye moves in and around the picture. We set our camera to ISO 100 at f8 in a 30th of a second to allow the ambient light coming from the lanterns and fire to show. Outside the door, we double stacked 2 heads to mimic the sun striking the main subject from head to toe. We also put another light shooting through the window. All 3 exterior flashes are set to full power. We hid 2 behind the door and desk at a quarter power inside the room. And then there's one illuminating the mother and daughter set to half power. We bounced the last light into the corner, opening up the shadows and blending it all together. That one was set to full power. There you have it.
All right. Make sure we get our sound back here. So that was 7 lights in order to be able to light that shot. Obviously, you had the 2 out the window, the ones behind, outside the other window, and so forth. The interesting concept behind this idea, if you watch the full video, is we actually give the whole backstory of what's going on. People say sometimes, well, I wonder what led up to the moment that picture was made. And so we give like a 2-minute build of all the things that led to the blocking of these people in this exact place. And then as the video camera is backing up, you back right over our heads where we click the actual frame that you see here that produced this picture. And so that was part of just kind of the intrigue of how to do it.
And we picked the alternation also design-wise because that was what Henry Peach Robinson also did.
Yep. And so as you can see here, we have a dark value of the door going against the light value of the guy's chest, I'll call it, but he's got dark suspenders, and then he's against a dark area, and then it goes into a light area, and so forth. And so that alternation is a principle, an artistic principle that gives a picture strength when you look at it. But you can see the leading lines that pull you in compositionally. You got things on the edge that bounce you, and so forth. You've got directional light coming. But if you had not heard this, what you should know is that the most important light that we used in this picture was the light that was actually closest to camera to our left, which was bouncing into the ceiling area. That was our fill light, because what does that control?
Ratios.
And what is another way of explaining controlling ratios? Controls our contrast, right? And so before we had that, we use the term blending it all together. Before we had that light in place, all the lights coming in all felt very
sharp and harsh.
Very harsh, very sharp, and very directional. And so we wanted direction to the light. We wanted to appear coming through the door and coming in, but we wanted that blend.
We wanted detail in our shadows.
That's right. Conversely, taking this same space, we grabbed about a year later the LC500, which is the light stick that they offer. You can change the color temperatures. It has barn doors again, different things you can do to shape light. And that's when we created something that looks a lot like this. So for this one, you're changing, you're playing off of using cool tones and warm tones. The cool tones being those blues, the warm tones being the yellows, the tungsten setting. And of course, the way that you achieve this effect in camera is you just simply set your camera to tungsten for your color balance. You use a tungsten light on her, but then any of your daylight balanced lighting that's present, all of a sudden it's going to get that blue type look coming in there. And so that's how you pull off something like that. Here's kind of showing where we place them. You've got lights above the head and some barn doors, the light coming in and hitting her face, also with the barn doors, so it's not just bouncing around everywhere. We've got light, again, we're using bouncing off the wall. That's the one we're using to control our ratios as they're coming in there, and then you can see the camera where it's placed. And so again, the final result looks something a lot like this. Now, let's just go to the other end of the spectrum here. We thought we were at the weakest powerful light that there was, but the weakest light that we could have played with is this one. It's the Lux Senior. It's the Retro Flash. It has obviously that silver reflector. It's a throwback in terms of its style.
Very retro.
Very retro, but it's got that bare bulb coming out, which actually is nice because it produces a beautiful specular in the way that it looks. It's a wonderful lighting as it goes around. So if we wanted to pull off a dramatic light with something that had less power than the V1, which is roughly 76 watt seconds, and this is, don't quote me on the tech, let's say it's 60 something watt seconds. So you're not using it to overpower the sun, generally speaking.
So don't do it in the midday sun.
Right? So what do you have to do then? Well, it doesn't have TTL, but it did have an optical slave. And I could use a voice-activated light stand.
That's me.
That's you. And as you can see there, we've just taken some plastic and wrapped it around that shape in order to create a bit of a softer light coming from it. And then the light that's on the camera is being used for one specific purpose, and that is to control the ratios and to bring some detail to the dark shadow areas, the blacks of her jacket. And so when you see the ultimate shot there, you can then see how that kind of comes together. And so you've created, with a very unpowerful light, more of a dramatic sky, a darker mood, so to speak, but it did take the proper timing of day in order to be able to pull off the effect in camera. Anything else that you take away from this in terms of tips?
No, it's just really important what time of day, especially right before dusk, where you get those pretty little pinks in the background. Very important.
That's right.
That you have everything set ahead of time so you can do it during that little 15 minutes of time.
Yep. And since you're using an optical flash, you can't just move. You have to move everything in relation to each other, so that you have that line of sight. And that's sometimes fun when we have boundaries or limitations. A lot of times that's where the creativity comes in.
Absolutely. I think every time limitations give you the structure in which you can be creative.
Exactly. There may be times that you come to the end of something because you realize limitation is ultimately it's impossible or it is required. But oftentimes, if you have every bit of tool at your disposal and you carry it in all situations, eventually you don't even know which light to pull out.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's good just to say, I'm going to make an exercise in this, or I'm going to practice this.
Yes.
Yep. So let's look real quickly on the theatrical side of things. This is the S30. There's also the S60, which is a bit more powerful. But in this case, we had the barn doors, we had honeycombs and snoots, and we had a lens that we could adjust as far as the distance. But what we really couldn't adjust was the power. It was limited to 30 watt seconds as far as an LED. So then we had to figure out, okay, if we wanted to light something that was going to be, 24 feet wide and 12 feet tall?
20 feet wide.
20 feet wide. Okay.
12 feet tall.
Yeah, 12 feet tall. Yeah. Is that right? Yeah, because it was 4 or 3. Yeah. Yeah. So it was a larger set that we're doing with this, so it required more lights. So let's take a look at the picture here. You can see how we have architectural elements that are coming down. We've had to raise our ISO here, or ISO to 800 because obviously it's not as bright a light in order to make it work. And so beyond those 3 architectural lights, you've got the dappled light that's coming in, suggesting time of day, and different lights that are striking different subjects. But maybe we should just let the video do the talking.
Okay.
We admire how theatrical lighting designers use light to frame the stage, as well as directing our eyes where to look. One helpful way to think about lighting a scene is that it is equal parts sculpting and painting, covering large areas and chiseling away at smaller ones. For David and myself, the art side of things always informs our technical decisions. We want our lighting to establish an emotional undercurrent and to incorporate light in a way that creates interesting visual shapes and forms. When concepting the scene of a 1950s train station, we wanted the lighting to be both expressive and purposeful. Because of that, we imagined the time of day to be about 5:15 p.m., suggesting a mixture of strong light and shadows with a bit of dapple. We wanted the 3 downlights to create an architectural statement. The remaining lights are used to communicate mood and atmosphere and help bring emphasis to different areas of importance. One useful tip is to pay close attention to where you place both your highlights and shadows. To emphasize your main subjects, seek to separate them from the background to communicate their importance.
All right, so, I think that was, I'm going to just make it up, 13 lights. 12, 13, I can't remember. Maybe more.
I think it was 17.
Okay, yeah, whatever the number was. We needed a certain number of lights to be able to pull it off and to be able to make the shot, work. So we had built the set. You can watch the behind the scenes video if you want, see how we built the set and did all that kind of stuff. Ultimately, the structure of it is using dynamic symmetry for the composition. And composition is the most critical thing that you're going to use. Well, composition, the arrangement, and then also color and values are the 3 keys to what gets somebody to look at your photo. And then once you've gotten them to look, then you've got to have something within there that rewards them for participating and looking at your work. The lighting just affirms or confirms to them that they're seeing what they should be seeing, that this is perhaps at the end of the day or perhaps it's in the morning, I don't know, but I can feel like there's a little texture that's coming into it, etc. And the fact that we've got the composition going, that already informs for us that we know that the girl on the outside and the guy on the edge, they need to be leaning like this to follow those dynamic implied lines that your brain would see if you made it evident like this. But if you're just looking at the picture right there, you just appreciate the way that the picture is held together and the cohesive nature of it. So we talked briefly about the fact that Rembrandt was going to be coming up, but this is our encouragement to you to, he said it like this: practice, what you know, and it's going to make clear to you what you don't know. That's it in a nutshell. Mm-hmm. When you get out there and you do the work, you'll find the areas that you're weakest in. And if you only focus on the areas that you're strong, then ultimately you're not going to be as well-rounded as an artist. And it'd be like a bodybuilder only working out one particular part of their body, and it becomes disproportionate to the other. And so our encouragement would be to work out all sides. Now, there is an objection that we get quite often, and people say, well, it's easy for you, and insert excuse. Godox, supports you. Okay, great. Yes, I mean, they do, and that's appreciated.
Or Godox gives you all your light.
Godox gives you a light. Yeah, sure. They give me a light to go create something for them to be able to do. Like, that's part of, they're looking for somebody to create, and they have the equipment. Perfect.
But that's not what we did.
Well, ultimately, we this is not a new phenomenon for us. This was going on even years before we had a relationship with Godox. And so over a decade ago, we did what?
Well, people said, well, you have a bunch of lights, so you're able to do things that we can't do. And that was their excuse. So we went on eBay and purchased $300 worth of lights and brought them in and lit with $300 worth of used lights.
We were playing a game. We got $300 worth of lights that were basically from the 1970s. So arguably, it was within the realm of what anybody else could do in order to pull something off. And then you just have to know, how am I going to modify them, and where do I want to put them, and for what reason. But more importantly, I've got to have the idea to begin with of what it is I'm trying to illustrate or communicate in order to answer those questions. And so the end result was a picture that looked a lot like this. And so
like this.
Yeah. And so my short refrain would be, your problem isn't that you don't have a piece of equipment. Your problem is you don't have any good ideas. And once you get those good ideas, then you'll find the right equipment, whether you buy it or rent it or borrow it, or make it, like whatever it is, you'll find a solution to it. A piece of equipment will not solve your problems, but it does solve
a problem,
a particular problem. Exactly. And so, so again, sufficiency kind of came into play here. And this idea of sufficiency is something that I think it might help to look at something besides photography just to appreciate more fully. This is Manet, and what he's doing is creating this painting, and I would argue with, or I'd make the point that it has a sufficient amount of red in it. Any more red, and it would become too dominant, and it would overpower the contrast of the people that are in the boat. Even the amount of detail in the front versus the back, the suggestions of things, how dark a value that they are. Obviously, they have to be a dark value. You've got the circle that's there. You've got some on the bottom. You've got some on the top.
Well, just by his contrast, he's telling you where to look.
Exactly. And so, people want to know a formula oftentimes, and we can give you ranges. But at the end of the day, it's about cultivating your sense of aesthetics, and within that, having an appreciation for the sufficient amount of light or color or whatever it is to pull something off. And the best analogy for you would be the difference between a chef and a cook. And a cook would basically say, give me a textbook or give me a book, and I'm going to take 1 cup of flour and I'm going to flatten it. And of course, a chef says a pinch of this, a dash of that. And yes, they're working off of things, but they don't sweat as many small things because they can visualize the big picture.
It's the taste. And how does it taste?
And at the end of the day, it's to taste. Exactly. Okay. So moving from a light like the Lux Senior, we go back to something a little bit more powerful than the V1. So now we're at 100 watt seconds. The beautiful thing about the 100 Pro is that it is shaped almost like a beverage can. And so that flat base allows you to be able to set it somewhere. And that's what helped us when we created this next shot. So here was the next shot, basically shot without any lighting.
Just the ambient light.
The ambient light that was there. It's coming underneath her chin a bit strong. There's a lot of dark areas that are within there. Here's the same shot using a barn doors and a snoot. And then we needed one more light over in the corner, which instead of having to stand, just set it on top of a piano.
Yes, just to control the ratios.
Exactly, because that light could sit and just bounce straight up at the ceiling, and that's the one we use to control the ratios. And that's when you get something where you've got, again, directional lighting coming together, blended, and making it work. Similarly, this is on that same shoot. This is that base exposure that you're going for there, because you want to make sure that you've got your ambient properly captured within the scene. And then now we're putting colored gels on the light as well to be able to create that sense of evening or nighttime and the moonlight coming through.
A glass of milk at bedtime.
Exactly. Anybody who's ever been around a young one when it's bedtime, there's always that one more thing.
I'm thirsty.
I'm thirsty. You haven't fed me. Like whatever it is, it's just that one more thing. Absolutely. Moving from these less powerful lights, well, now let's get into the 300 series. This allows you to work on even larger scales or at further distances. There's a ton of different modifiers that are out there, from the soft boxes to the reflectors, the focus reflectors, the barn doors. We use those barn door kits that they have there, which more like a honeycomb. We use those quite often for doing wedding receptions and controlling our spill on the dance floor, etc. Obviously, having the soft boxes comes in very handy. 300s are something that in the wedding world, those are heavily used because they're powerful enough. Enjoy using them with an umbrella, yet they're lighter weight, and it makes it easier to be able to travel. Here is an example of doing a shot where, again, getting a bit more distance. Now we've got foreground, and now we've got kind of background going on within the scene. Again, as I'm saying, multiple distance here. You're carrying focus throughout a shot. When you look at how it's being arranged, you see once more our most important light is the one closest to camera, bouncing at the ceiling. Stop me if you've heard this before. Controlling our ratios. That's the one that allows the picture to blend. The other lights are coming either from the umbrella or the softbox as they're coming in to be able to hit our subjects, and they're just placed outside the window. And that's how you pull off a shot like that. So pretty straightforward in the way that can be done. Again, compositionally, you're looking at leading lines, pulling you in, arrangements of objects and things within objects, storytelling aspects, and so forth. We can move to the 600, which is now we're getting even more power, have more of an opportunity that if we wanted to go overpower the sun, so to speak, depending on how you want to do it. This shot was done like that. It was done with two AD600s, bare bulb. There was no diffusion. There's no diffusion put on them. One is placed over to the side of her. The other is coming in. Again, you probably heard this before, but we're trying to add some detail to the black of her tights or her pants that are there, and her boots and so forth. But just the dark areas, you're trying to not just have those go completely dark, but it's reduced down in its power in relation to the main light that's hitting the subject. Interestingly, if you want to talk about pre-visualizing, this shot I did pre-visualize as being more like if it was a pin or a button that you might wear. So I envisioned it being more circular in terms of its presentation. Shortly thereafter, we went and did another shot. Same thing, using those two lights to be able to come in. Now you're starting to get a bit more drama to what you're doing with the clouds and the sky and so forth. Bit of a metaphor here, though, about just obviously being enslaved or chained to something, and she's reaching for something. But the full context of this picture is probably not as well thought out compared to some things. This one, on the other hand, plays off of a painter friend of ours, and this is being done with a single 600, and it's got just a honeycomb on it that's striking her face, and then the rest is just the ambient exposure as that light's coming through the windows behind her, and then we put aerosol mist in the air in order to be able to kind of pull off the effect. Can you give them just a little background behind what the inspiration might be for something like this?
Well, it was Andrew Wyeth, and it was the whole concept of Christina's world. Except in Christina's world, you saw her from the backside, and we decided that maybe we would just turn it around and see it from her face.
Yep. But instead of just having a girl laying there in the way that she was, and then having the architecture, let's say, in the background, and then having the wheelchair back there, how important is having that skull or animal head in the back?
Well, it creates a triangle.
Exactly. So if you didn't have that, what you would have is just this ping pong back and forth between foreground girl, background, having the mass of that wheelchair, and it would have created a tension between the two. But by adding that third object, your eye starts to move down, sees her, moves up, back over, and you start getting that proverbial circular eye observation.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we're trying to connect the dots that every one of us as humans have struggles, and the tension on her hands as she's struggling with like we all do with every one of our issues.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So moving from a 600, well, now you can get to the 1200s, Now you're talking about a whole lot more power, especially compared to what you can do with a V1, which means you can work larger distances or brighter situations in order to pull off different things.
You can overpower the ambient light.
You can overpower a lot of things. So, at this point, you're now 15 times more powerful than using a V1 at this point. Godox does make a ring flash for the 1200 Pro. It's called the R1200. And so this was an exercise using the ring flash, and we created a picture that looked like this, and just kind of, we'll step you through and just kind of show you the different exposures, different effects, and you'll just see how it all comes together. But the base exposure looked a lot like this, f11, 2/50th of a second, ISO 64. There's a bit of detail that's kind of coming in there, but yeah, I'm saying, but relatively, it's a black frame. From there, first thing we built up was how do we want to have the light behind her, and so we didn't want it to be overpowering, and so we built this up so that background flash is set to a 16th of the power. Now we get to the fill flash, and that fill flash is useful. And here's an example of when you might want to use a ring flash. Yes, you can use it in the typical fashion type situations, but what if you were in a situation where you could not physically, like let's say you're in an atrium with the ceiling so high, there's no place to bounce off of, or didn't want to bounce your fill light off of something, but you still need your fill light to come in and be soft and pleasing. Well, that's where we were using the ring flash here to do just that. So this is the ring flash coming directly from camera to control our fill or our ratio in terms of things. And so this is at 1/8 of the power. And the reason we need to do that is because when you contrast it with what happened when it was just the umbrella, well, now you've got a lot of directional light coming in, and you can see how hard that shadow is coming off of her. And you think to yourself, okay, well, we're building somewhere, but it feels like it could be more refined.
But our ratios are now off.
Our ratios aren't there yet, right? And so that's when all of a sudden you do something like this, which brings in that fill light, and so this becomes the base exposure.
So the harsh shadows that were coming off the bench are much softer.
Yeah, you can see the difference in what it does to the shadows when you bring in that fill light, and now the end result when you art it up is something like this. So that's a perfect example of walking through just kind of how you just build or assemble something.
Let's change your dress.
Well, yeah, as long as you do something like that, you might as well take something else. So this was just another one we did of her. We also took the 1200 Pro outside. And so, this is a shot that's being done, built this set, carried it out there, set it all up, got the different people arranged in the different spots to do their different things. And then we've got the two 1200s that are set off out of the shot coming in to do the illumination and bring something like this all together. For that, we're using scoops a lot like this. A different shot we did out in the field, and this was at high noon, is a shot like this. Again, you've got that power that's available to you. If you don't want to use all the power, you don't have to. Another variation of something we did with the 1200, coming in like this, or this one right here. This was actually shot in a parking lot. Just looking for elements in the foreground to pull together, and then just pop it. 2 lights, 1 light behind her, creating some separation light and a little translucency to her attire, and the other light being the main light.
Hair.
Yep. And then you get to this one, which is the P2400, which I jokingly refer to as being both a 4x4 truck that you can drop into low gear, but also like a Maserati, because it can shoot really fast for cycle times. And both of those capabilities give you certain abilities. And so for this shot right here, and we were using a combination of either these 2400 H2400s or the ring flash, which is the R2400. They're 30 times more powerful than the V1 at this point, coming out of that power pack. We were using the parabolic reflectors, which we really, really like the parabolic reflectors from Godox. They're just delightful. I love the build quality. Love the way that you can finesse your light. You were talking about Fresnels and what you can do. You can do a lot of light shaping here, depending on how much you move in and out your light in relation to your reflector. They come in different sizes, which easily are 26, 34, 50, or 62 inches. And so we created a shot that looked like this. So number one, we're stopping action, which is something that we needed a fast flash cycle in order to be able to do. We needed fast recycle times in order to be able to pull it off. And we were also doing this over a very large distance. So to kind of just help not make it just hype, here is from our photo mechanic. This kind of shows you I was at ISO 100, I was at f16 at 200th of a second. So I've dropped the camera down in terms of where I'm shooting, which gives me some freedom that I didn't have, let's say, with the S30 when I was already at ISO 800. And yet, when you look at the power that we're using there, we were shooting at a quarter power on those 2400 packs, used 2 packs in order to be able to light it, 4 lights total. Here's a different version of kind of that same shoot where we turned her to the side and just had her do her hula hoops like this.
This was 45 seconds from start to finish.
Well, yeah, so this one was just, let's see how fast it recycles. Now, I did raise my ISO from 100 to 400 and drop to 5.6 at this point in order to be able to not have a single misfire on it. But now I could just stand there and have her go like this and shoot 144 shots in a row and just have that flash go off, which, depending on the subject matter you're shooting, could be really useful for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then this kind of shows what our lighting style was like. And so we've got the different parabolics there. One in front that's providing our main light, one behind her that's being used in order to create separation light. We've got a light coming from the ceiling that's coming down on her, which is our separation light. And then there's another light on the ground, which you can't see from this angle, that's then shooting up. And we could turn and we could look at it from this direction instead, if that helps. But just to kind of give you a sense of perspective, how big are those windows? I'm going to guess that they're easily, would you say 15 feet is accurate? Yeah. Each one of those windows represents about 15 feet, or I don't know what the distance is between the columns, but we're at larger distances working from either our subject or the light sources in order to produce things. But because you have such a big light, or because you have such a powerful light or a fast light, you can do different things. And so it's great to have those abilities. Different version that we had done was using the reflector. This time it had the diffusion on it, but we wanted to use it more here for our fill light as opposed to the main light. And then we took a more structured light, or a gridded light, which was actually a 600, and used that to light her face. And then we used the large reflector, parabolic reflector, to come in from the 2400 and just add that little bit of fill light so that the light wasn't quite so directional.
For the shadows.
For the shadows, yeah. There's the 200s, which we absolutely love. The beautiful thing about using a constant light is you can see what's going on. Here's examples of how we shoot with it in the studio. Obviously here we're playing with color theory and very monochromatic color schemes, bringing it together. You can see how kind of big the set was overall there.
Not very big.
Not very big. The light coming from above her. This is shooting over David's shoulders. He's taking the shot. You've got seeing how the lights are being done over here, and even bouncing some light.
I actually messed up, so we ended up having to put a lower light and kick it.
Well, so this gets into the whole thing of like when you box yourself into corners, like we box ourselves in corners. And so if we had changed the way we had hung that strip light, we could have gotten it lower to the ground to accomplish what we needed to accomplish with that light there with the reflector. But in the moment, you're like, it's just not working. We got to get this. It was just easier to add one more light than it was to try and rehang or rearrange what it is that we had. But we would have had sufficient light if we had just moved it.
Absolutely.
And so you get that kind of shot like that. And shortly after that, we took this same shot of her, just changing it up tremendously. But by changing your ratios for your lighting, you distinctly change the mood or atmosphere of the image that you're looking at. Other examples with the 200, beautiful soft quality of light coming in. You could do high key type shots that come together, beautiful different ways, beautiful catch lights. You can light sets. This shows on I guess it'd be the left side is what was in camera, the right side is the final interpretation. So I'd say it's a fairly accurate, reasonable interpretation to kind of get the final version of the shot. Are there a few places where you have to nip and tuck and do things to make it work? Of course.
Yes, I had a. I didn't have a second stained glass window.
Yeah, exactly. I thought you had to add one. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's just things that you go. It's just not. It's not feasible, or it's not cost effective.
Didn't own one.
Yep. Here's another version using with constant lights from a workshop we were teaching. And kind of showing her. The actual straight out of camera shot looks a lot like this. So you've got. Things like, if you notice here, you want that light coming to her, but we also want light hitting the trees above. It's not going to work technically unless you can make a hole for that light. So of course you punch a hole and then fix it in post over there, but the light's got to come from somewhere in order to pull off the intended effect or the illusion. You can use those constant lights to do large groups like this one. This one took 3 days for David to light, took about 10 minutes to shoot because he had pulled it all together ahead of time.
We actually put mannequin heads where the other people's heads were,
right,
and lit them and then put them in position, so it was pretty simple.
Yep. So once you had your lighting figured out, then all they had to do was come and step in and do it. And arguably I think you shot, I'll make it up, 10 frames, and you said you had it.
It was 10 exposures.
And that doesn't make it better, whether you did it all in camera or if you did it in post. It's just showing you what can be done, and it depends on where you want to spend your time. Because you could assemble this in post and spend 3 days.
Well, thank you.
But you could, so, it just depends on how you'd like to do it. So this brings me back to another Englishman from the late 1800s. And he basically said this: it's our art principles that indicate what is desirable in our pictures. And then it's our science or our craft that tells us how our preconceived ideas can become realized. So we first have to have that idea. We have to figure out, okay, well, how can we present it in a beautiful way? And then once we've figured that part out, then the last part is, okay, let's just go out and execute it. And of course, the question comes up, well, what if it was in reverse? What if you just found yourself in a situation executing? Can you still figure out kind of what would make it beautiful? And the answer is yes. I'd suggest to you that the picture that we did with the Lux Senior, we knew we wanted to do a shot that was more dramatic, but we didn't think about it ahead of time where we're going to put the lights. In fact, we hadn't even tested out the optical flashes until earlier that day to see how much distance, how can we make it work, etc. So we had to back into that in the moment, but we did know how to create shape and form and create that dramatic sense to the lighting. And we also knew that we needed to have that fill light come in to have the details in the black.
That was mainly by practice and past years of practice.
Absolutely. Other examples, coming in might be something like this, a shot that I had done of my daughter, shot that David did like this, where what you've got here is that reverse key light that we were talking about, where a lot of the lights are behind and coming through. I can't. This was done in a ballroom. I can't tell you how big this set is. What would you guess?
12 feet wide.
12 feet wide, something like that. And then you wind up with a shot like this. But the same shot that's here, which is arguably more just foreground and background. Notice, if you would, this is the theory behind it. This is the art principles. Notice how it's more monochromatic color schemes, where it's kind of that red that's in there, and then you've got different values. You've got the white that's coming in there, but the tones are relatively understated and muted. Well, this next one is going to show kind of a similar type feeling.
I call it more analogous than monochromatic.
You're right, more analogous. This next one is going to be dual complementary color. And so same type thing, only here, now we're working on foreground, middle ground, and background, because we've got all three planes present within this scene, whereas the other one only had two planes. And as you get more depth of more planes in your picture, that's when you can start expanding your color, much like Van Gogh would do in his scenes of wheat fields. And so that's why you've got, the blues and the yellows, and they're playing off of the greens and the reds. And this goes back to the idea of sufficiency. How much is the right amount? Well, it's salt to taste. But generally speaking, doing it in 50-50 qualities, it feels like Christmas or Mardi Gras. Everything vibrates, all the color vibrates at the same frequency. So usually it's more in that 70-30, 80-20 type blend, where one set of complementary colors is more dominant within the scene. Perhaps in this one it's the blue and the yellow, and then the greens and the reds become secondary. So I hope you've heard it. There are three ways that you can control what people look at in your picture. One is through color. Another is through the values, those black and whites and things like that. And then, of course, composition. And just to really drive home the importance of composition, I wanted to take a moment to look at Cezanne's Apples and Oranges, which is a famous painting of his. And he said that when he went out in nature, he observed that nature often arranged things in the cone, the cylinder, and the sphere. And he didn't necessarily seek to go out and create cones and cylinders and spheres within his work, but what he started noticing is that when his arrangement started being more pleasing, he could see he was using cones, cylinders, and spheres within them. And of course there's triangles and there's fulcrums, there's all sorts of different things that are going on here. But rather than ask you to diagram this yourself, I'll just kind of show it to you. But what you have is that cylinder shape comes in with the picture. The cone shape comes in there with the oranges and the apples in the middle. And then, of course, you've got the arrangement of the apples that are there. You had something you want to say?
No, your chair's squeaking.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm moving around trying to talk about it. And then you can see some of the different triangles that are present there. And I mentioned a fulcrum. That's the importance of that apple in the middle there. It allows the picture to bend around something, or gives that center point that everything works around. So that's why you go, why is everything overlapped? And then there's that one hanging, and that kind of helps give you an idea of how he did his arrangement. You can also see how he worked high to low to high to low in the way that he did things. So to bring it all back together, that great man, Henry Peach Robinson, one of the things that he said was this: if a picture is to be successful, it needs to have oneness of purpose, of intention, of story, of thought, of lines, of light and shade. Everything must have a meaning, and the meaning must be the object of the picture. There must be nothing to let. So my encouragement to you would be this: you move forward with your good idea in a photo when you've thought it through. And ideally, a way of testing that is that you're either happy with your idea, or you can explain it to someone else in a way that also gets them to connect with it and gets excited.
I think you're right. If you can't explain it, you haven't thought it all the way through.
That's right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to Adorama. I think Akiva, you may be on there to pass along if there are any questions. If there are not, totally understand. We certainly want to say thank you for both Godox and Adorama for inviting us to be a part of us today. So please send those questions in. And thank you so much for being a part of this. If you'd like to connect with David or myself, my dad's at David Edmonson, or I'm at Luke Edmonson on most of those social media sites that are out there. It says no questions at the moment, but let's give it a minute so we can do that. Dad, can you just share some of your wisdom?
Just right off the cuff. You know what? When I do simple shots, I like to go with a simpler color palette. When only you're doing foreground and background. And when you go foreground, middle ground, background, as you were saying about using the more dual complementary colors and things like that, is very much like Van Gogh used to do. And that's what ended up making his work so impressive.
Yeah, let's get into just real quickly. So for us, we did get very interested in photography, well, and painters going back. And oftentimes you'll hear that, if you want to understand photography, if you want to learn art, go back to, say, the painters. But then there was also a very beneficial period for us to go back and look at the early photographers. We talk about AI or whatever. I'm thinking back to a controversy that was going on in the 1870s, and this was that wet, dry plate time and so forth. Because you used to have, in order to carry your darkroom out into nature, if you were a nature photographer, you had to carry a wagon with horses to carry all the chemicals and supplies to develop the plates on location. And so the argument was that one day there would be a machine that could go from hill and dale and from hither to yonder, and it would go around and it would take pictures, and then it would develop the picture, it would print the picture, it would frame the picture, and then it would deliver it to the Queen. This was something that was going on in England. And you think today, with whether you want to call it the Google Maps or the Apple Maps or any of those kinds of things, I mean, there literally are now driving vehicles that go out there and take pictures to be able to do something. And it's not that far away from to where that type of photography will be able to produce, quote unquote, finished works. But is it the same thing as the mind of a human? And I'd argue no.
No, to me, all AI is taking the best of what humans think and then putting it together to save you time.
Yep.
So
there you have it. Okay. Any other questions that are coming in? Anything we can do to help answer for you or make your life better? Okay, comment from Don McGregor. Always enjoy your passion and respect for principles and use them to tell stories. Well, thank you, Don.
Hey, Don.
Appreciate you tuning in, my friend. It's always good to talk to someone, even if it's someone you know. It's even better.
Things are going well in Canada.
Yeah, even better is somebody that we know. So, yep. All right. Let's see here. Looks like that's it for questions. Okay. Well, then we will bid you adieu.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you. You have a blessed day.